Welcome, everyone in the Zoom room, to the second event in a three-part series called A Picture of Health, A Politics of Disability and Illness, curated by myself, Elizabeth Frost. I am professor of English at Fordham University in New York City, together with my colleague and dear friend, the writer and disability arts advocate, Kenny Fries, who is also in the Zoom room. In a moment, I will introduce our guest, the artist Pelenakeke Brown. But first, some notes on access and the structure of our event today. To self-describe briefly, I'm a late middle-aged white woman with shoulder-length brown and gray hair, wearing glasses, and a gentle reminder to participants to self-describe briefly before speaking. This event offers ASL interpretation. I'd like to thank our two interpreters here today. They are going to be using the spotlight function on Zoom to ensure that the interpretation is always visible. A reminder to pace your speaking so that our interpreters can do their work. You also can display the captioning by toggling the on-off button on your Zoom menu. Please post any questions or issues about access in the chat, and we will do our best to address them. I would like to thank Fordham University for funding this event series, and I also would like to pause to acknowledge that through the history of settler colonialism, Fordham University occupies the land of the Lenape people. This event will last 1 hour. Pelenakeke Brown will present her work for about 20 minutes. We will then have a Q&A, which will be led by several students who are currently taking the course Introduction to Disability Studies. And big thanks to the students who are doing such an amazing job. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest today, Pelenakeke Brown. Brown is an interdisciplinary artist whose practice explores the intersections between disability theory and Samoan concepts. Her practice spans visual art, text, and performance. She is from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and is a Samoan Pakehā crip artist. Her work has been featured internationally in the modes of performance, exhibition, and publication. Recently, her work was included in the exhibit Queering the Crip, Cripping the Queer, an exhibition on queer disability history, activism, and culture, which was co-curated by Kenny Fries. And this was held at the Schulis Museum in Berlin. Brown's work is informed by the Samoan concept of the va, relationships across time and space, as well as by the experience of crip time. Her work investigates sites where these dual theories intersect and offer space. I will end by noting that this series as a whole emerges from the project that Kenny Fries and I are collaborating on, which is called A Picture of Health, Joe Spence, A Politics of Disability and Illness, which is funded by the Canada Council for the Arts and by Fordham University. As part of this project, we've launched a website that places the work of the radical artist and activist Joe Spence in the context of the lived experience of chronic illness and of contemporary disability arts. And this includes the work of Pelenakeke Brown. In her series of pieces called Grasp and Release, for example, Brown blacks out pages of her own medical records, remaking them into found poems. In this way, reminiscent of Joe Spence, although not necessarily at all influenced particularly by Joe Spence, Brown reclaims the narrative of her own embodied experiences. And as a final note, a recording of today's event will become available soon on our Joe Spence project website. I am so grateful and excited to welcome Pelenakeke Brown. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that really warm welcome. Malo lava moa malelangi e mama, olo ingo o Pelenakeke Brown. I am a light brown skinned woman with brown wavy hair that I brushed today, which I was excited about. And I'm calling in from my house in Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland, Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I'm really excited to be with you all here today. I'm going to switch into presenting my slides. And so we'll see what happens. You know, you never know what you're going to say until you say it. But what I thought I would try and talk about today is something that you've already touched on, Elizabeth, intersections between va, ta, and crip time. So I thought we could start with what does the va mean? And so va is found in a lot of different cultures. It's wa, W-A in Japanese, and it's also wa, W-A in Maori culture, and then it's also found across the Pacific or across the oceans. And so kind of the grandfather of Pacific literature, his name is Albert Wendt, and he wrote this essay in 1996 called Tattooing the Post-Colonial Body, and it's kind of a seminal text for any person from this region. And so he defines the va as its space between, the betweenness, not empty space, not space that separates, but space that relates, that holds separate entities and things together in the unity that is all, the space that is context, giving meaning to things. The meanings change as the relationships or the context change. And I think that's a really important distinction, like depending on where you are, who you're with, what's your relationship to you and them. And this can also include yourself and place and land and people. It doesn't have to be between humans. And so depending on where you are and who you're with, the context and the relationships will change. And I think the other interesting thing to think about the va is it's always happening. It's just in Sāmoan culture, it's just inherent. So it's always there. But when I went to university and I was in my bachelor's degree and I found this essay, it was a really kind of important moment for me, and I always return. It was nice going back last night and going back to that same essay and finding the way that Albert defines it. And then and so the other thing I wanted to touch on is ta. And so I think I always talk about the va, but the ta is just as important. And what's also really exciting in Pacific methodology is that there are now these different theories. And so some people ascribe to the va theory, some people ascribe to the va-ta theory. And so I think I'm moving more into thinking about the va and the ta together. And so ta means time, but it also means to strike. And so in this way, we can think about it in relationship to tattooing. And so in a way, it's kind of a way to mark time when you think about it in relationship to tattooing, you're tapping. So I think I just wanted to touch on ta, the time is really important. How do you mark time in relationship to space and who you're with and context and all those kinds of things that Albert is talking about in these kind of two definitions. And then I thought I should touch on Alison Kafer's thinking about crip time. So this comes from, as you'll know, disability studies, and Alison talks about it as rather than bending disabled bodies and minds to meet the clock, crip time bends the clock to meet disabled bodies and minds. And so when I kind of came across this definition of crip time, I thought it was really cool that in a way, I think it reminds me of the va, and it reminds me of that kind of relational way of thinking about time. And so I'm always excited to think about where I can see these kind of overlaps and intersections of Sāmoan culture and then disability culture, being someone who identifies as crip or disabled as well as Sāmoan. So I thought I would just go through some projects. So this is a slide and it has 4 images of this work called Excavation and Archival Process, or that has led into Grasp and Release, which I will talk to in a moment. So on the top left corner, it's I'm in a barn and I'm lying on the floor and I've kind of got my arms raised and I'm mid-performance, so mid-movement, and there's beautiful kind of light coming down from the skylight. And then behind me is a white wall where there's an installation of my medical file. And then on the floor, there's kind of a little pile of files. So it kind of suggests that the installation is not finished. And then in the top right corner is kind of a close-up of those of the installation of the medical file. And as you can see close up, some of them are kind of obscured. They've got, they've been turned over, so they're white in the back, but you can kind of see some text. They're also kind of coming off the wall. And so I think that's an interesting thing to think about, just how they're installed. And then bottom right is 6 composite images of the kind of performance that I did. So in 2018, I went to Denniston Hill, which is a residency space, and I kind of did my first foray into looking into my medical file, and I did this installation as well as this activation, and it's just 6 images of my really my hands moving. And then on the bottom left is 2 pages of my medical file. You kind of can't read the text, it's kind of blurry and kind of on purpose. And then on the left side, you'll notice that there are some words that have been left, and then the rest are being crossed out. And I like this image because it kind of shows you the process of where I kind of started, which was kind of just looking at the medical file, just installing it onto the wall, inviting people to look at it, and then doing a activation in front of it. And then I started to think about how can I kind of again, thinking about the VAR, right? So I've requested my medical file. I'm like learning all of these different things about myself. So I guess the most interesting thing was I learned all of these really personal stories about my history, not my medical history, but my like familial history. I learned about my mom's immigration status through my medical file. There was like a letter from the immigration lawyer. I learned about my dad taking me to physio every Friday. And so that was kind of the thing that I learned was in this kind of hard text. I learned all about these, I guess, soft relationships or important, intimate relationships. And so then I wanted to, yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Either the screen share is not showing, or perhaps you haven't enabled that yet.
Guys, sorry.
No. I'm sorry. I didn't want to interrupt, but we, of course, want to. Okay, here we go. Thank you so much.
I was like thinking that there was something about it. So I think I've described everything, so it's okay. But the first, it was kind of, I just had all of the definitions and I've read them all out. So you haven't missed anything. Okay, let's go to slideshow. Okay, I was wondering why I couldn't see everyone. This makes so much sense. Thank you for stopping me. Okay, so yeah, this is kind of what I was talking about before. Yeah, and so the next step of looking at the relationships or doing an excavation of the medical file was doing these blackout poems. So I've got some here to share, but I think you can also find them on the website. And so the first one is called She Assists, and it took me a long time to figure out what was the best way to extrapolate poems from this. And so I tried lots of different methods, but the one that worked was choosing words that are related to the body or can be thought about as movement, and through that a poem was revealed. And so this is probably my favorite one, and I think the first one that I did, and you can read it any way that you want to read it, but the words that are left read: range and shoulder, increase tone, elbow extension, grasp and release, raking scissor grip, left hand, draws lines and circles, she assists. So I also loved that there was this poetry within the medical file. You know, who thought that your medical file would say such beautiful phrases as grasp and release or raking scissor grip? And so I kind of loved all of those things. And this is another one called She Revealed, and this one's a contrapuntal poem, so you can read it as two separate ones, or when you read it across it becomes one, but also you can read it any way that you like. And so if I read it as one, she potentially reads as: she displayed marked preference, left grasp, would hold, extend wrist, quite unusual, not bringing left arm, it was resistance, her resistance revealed. So I also really liked that in this kind of poetry, I learned all of these. What was revealed to me was there was this kind of agency that they were also kind of noting in the medical file, and then the blackout poems kind of revealed those things. And so I think another thing to understand is I guess my framework or methodology is starting with the va, starting with the ta, but through thinking about the relationships that emerge, there may be several stages. You know, the project can take lots of different iterations as you kind of do the different discovery. I will skip this one. It's just another blackout poem that I've taken a photo of, and just in regards to time. And then I've moved on to another image, and this is from my work, a traveling practice. And so this is kind of bringing in that idea of ta and this idea of the tattooing practice. And so another project that I was really interested in was thinking about the keyboard as a site for choreography, as a place to travel across time and space. You know, what does crip time mean? It can also mean staying home and being on the internet or talking to your friends. So thinking about technology as a way to time travel or be in connection, and also the internet as a way to like travel across time and space. And then if you look down at your keyboard, some of the marks that you see in this image, you can find them in the keyboard, but they're also found in the traditional tattooing practice that we have. And so I was really excited by that again, in this kind of everyday object, there was this overlap of Indigenous Sāmoan culture. And then I love thinking about the keyboard as a tool for traveling. And so that's where a traveling practice comes from the title of a thesis of a tattooing master that we have. She is the first Samoan woman to be taught how to tattoo. So that's really exciting. And she's tattooed me. Her name's Tyler. And so I read her thesis, and I asked her if I could take that first title and use it in mine, because I agree that tattooing is a traveling practice. When I'm out in the world, you can kind of identify who I am based on my marks, if you even know what those marks mean. So yeah, so that was kind of the next stage of thinking about relationships, my relationship with technology, with how I type, how I use the keyboard, think about my relationship with movement or performance, thinking about language, you know, the language of the keyboard, enter and return are on the same key. And I love that kind of harks back to Indigenous ways of thinking about time. So again, thinking about crip time and but also Indigenous time. So yeah, I just love thinking about all these kinds of sites or tools that have all of these kind of connections. And then this next image is from a work called Crossings. And so it's a black background and then white marks. And again, those marks are created from the keyboard, but they're also from the malu, M-A-L-U, which is the Samoan women wear malus. And so it's a diamond shape, and there's a smaller diamond, and I think of it as a diptych. So the smaller diamond is separating from the larger diamond, and as you'll notice, the marks on the left are not repeated on the marks on the right, except for that smaller diamond. And so this work is talking about taima and tilawhainga. So taima, T-A-E-M-A, then tilawhainga, T-I-L-A-F-A-I-N-G-A. Faiga. And so they're twins, they were conjoined twins, so they're disabled, and they were joined by their back, and they went to an island and they received the history of Te Tau. And when they came back, a piece of wood separated them, but they so they were no longer conjoined. And when they came back to Samoa, they taught the history of Te Tau. So we actually, the history of tattooing actually comes from women, and it actually comes from disabled women. And so I guess that's kind of what I've been recently looking at, is kind of looking at history of disability in Indigenous culture, and how we've always had disabled people, and how they've always had, in our case, in Samoa, they've had a really important, tattooing is like, I would say, the foundational part of our art and culture, and mark making. And so this image is kind of thinking about that crossing across the ocean, receiving new knowledge, and it's also kind of mapping out their like literal separation from their backs. That's why the backs are the same, or the little diamond is the same. And then I guess what's also important to think about is the diamond shape is a really important shape in Samoan tattooing, because it's also the shape known as the malu. So that's why everything is in a diamond. It's quite intentional, I guess. How am I going for time? Okay. And then I just wanted to touch on another project that I did. And so these are two images from a performance with a collaborator that I work with often, Yo-Yo Lin. And so in the two images, Yo-Yo's in a white cube that has been projected on. And so in the first image on the left, she's mid-movement, and there are kind of these squiggly lines on the fabric. And in the right, she's sitting down next to kind of a cool looking lamp. And there's like a very childlike drawing that I actually drew of the view of my house. So it's like my window, and then there's a bus, a big intersection in a bus lane that comes every day. And so this work we made during during COVID, and it was kind of talking about being together while I was in New Zealand and she was in New York, and how we stayed connected. And it's and I actually didn't travel to New York to perform. I performed from my living room. And so I did a live performance with Yo-Yo, but I was projected onto the screen, and also was making these lines. And so I guess the other thing is I'm really interested in mark making or lines, and I couldn't be there with her. And so we started with me drawing my view, drawing what I could hear, drawing all of the sounds, so that I could kind of call myself into the room or into the theater in New York. And it's also a way of kind of introducing myself into the space. And so these are kind of what the two images are there at the beginning. And then we move into kind of audio describing, and we end up moving together, even though we're actually not together. And obviously that was a gamble if my internet broke down, but luckily I was there, and it actually did feel like we were moving together, which was really special. Yeah, so, and then this is just a scribble drawing, and I think it looks really great. So it's the cube. Yo-Yo's quite obscured, and I'd scribbled, and they'd projected that on. So everything was done live, like as I was drawing, that was projected on, and then it has some image of the audience watching on. And so I have a minute left, and I hope that through my talking, there's been some kind of investigation of, VAR and relationships. So I guess for this one with Yo-Yo, the investigation of the relationship was, how can we be together if we're apart? How can we use technology to be together if we're apart? How can we kind of call each other in? How can we, can this work? And we'd also send each other voice notes throughout the pandemic. So we'd included some of those. And so I guess that was what we were kind of exploring in that work. And then tā, or time, and also to mark was really important, because we started with me kind of describing and drawing what I could see, what I could hear, how I felt. kind of did a drawing of, traveling across the oceans to get to New Zealand because it's so far from New York. And then I guess for us, crip time is also a way of like being together, even if you can't leave the house. And so I think that was also really important. We know that everyone couldn't leave their house, but I guess we were kind of echoing practices that a lot of disabled people know of, sending a voice note if you're really tired and but want to be with each other. So I think it's also that kind of you want to be together, and so you're kind of calling to each other even if you can't physically be together. And I think that's all I'll leave you with. Thank you. And I will now stop sharing.
Thank you so much. Okay. I think I'm back on screen and audio just for a moment. Thank you so very much. That was incredibly beautiful. I am just going to hand over to several of my students who are here in the Zoom room who have some wonderful questions. And so I will ask each of you as you go to unmute and self-describe, etc. Thank you.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much for speaking with us today. I am a 20-year-old white female. I am sitting in a room with a window behind me and 2 posters. My first question that I want to ask is that you use very different medias within your work. What elements have you found to be the most challenging and or most impactful in regards to your experience?
In terms of the media?
Yes.
Yeah, I have used lots of different mediums, and I think I heard Kenny, you'll know that person's name, but she works in Chicago and she's really great. Chrissy, she works with disabled artists. There's her name will come, and she said she did a talk once, and she said that disabled artists are inherently multidisciplinary, and that's because we Carrie
Sandor.
Yeah, thank you, Kenny. Yeah, so Carrie did a talk in New York, and she said disabled artists are inherently multidisciplinary because depending on where your body is at or how you're feeling, you'll change your mediums. And so I'd never heard someone say that before, and it really clicked into my head. And I often say it to other disabled artists because I think in the art world, you're meant to work in one medium and be really good at it. And that's what people assume. And if you flit around, people think that you're not serious. But the way that I kind of approach it is I'm really interested in the kind of question. So I'm interested in like, what's the relationship? What's the context? What's the history? Think about the va and the ta and crip time. And then depending on what the questions are asking, then the medium will come through. So like that's how I investigate it. It's kind of through the questions first and then the medium. So that's why they're all so different. Like as you can tell, the medical file is kind of, I guess, more like of a traditional art practice. It's an installation, it's a performance, and you can make prints out of the drawing. So it's quite, whereas the keyboard drawings, that came from just an investigation. And so I didn't realize that I would, so I guess I'm always surprised in what happens. Last year I edited my first film, and that was because I had shot some footage and I thought, that would be a good idea. And so then I learned how to edit a film, or not a film, wasn't that good, but a video. And so I guess I would say I'm also someone who works with technology, but I'm not very technologically savvy, which is really embarrassing, but I'm not. But I'm more interested in the questions behind it, and I will learn the technology if I need to, if that's what's going to happen. So I learned how to use InDesign because a traveling practice, I actually did that in Word, and that's really hard to like format all of these marks in Word and keep it straight. Whereas the second one, I was like, there must be a smarter way. And so I learned how to use InDesign. So, but again, like I haven't really upgraded my skills, you know, like I just learn the technology based on what I need. Yeah, I hope that kind of helps.
Definitely, thank you. My second question that I wanted to ask you, what originally got you started in using your medical files as a source text? Like, what was your first like inspiration that you wanted to do that?
Yeah, thank you. I had always wanted to, like I've always been disabled, but I didn't really know a lot about my medical history. And if you grow up as a disabled kid, I think you actually don't know a lot about your history. You just like are like going through and being disabled. And so it was just something I had always thought I would do, because my family didn't really talk to me about it. And then I moved to New York, and I'd lived in New York for maybe 3 or 4 years at that point. And I just thought I would do it one day. Like I guess it was an idea I'd had a long time ago. And then when I read my medical file, I was like, oh, there's so much in there, but I didn't know what I would do. So then I was like carrying this medical file around with me for like a couple of months. And I like took it with me to Denniston Hill when I had my residency up there. So yeah, I think it was something I'd always thought, like I'd love to understand more about my own history. But then the history that I learned was completely different to what I thought I would learn, which I think is more interesting as well.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm gonna be the next one speaking. I'm Leah Merkelson. I have long dark hair and I'm wearing glasses, and I have a billboard behind me. Sorry if there's noise from people like walking around or whatever. And thank you very much for coming to speak with us today. So my first question is also about grasp and release. Blackout poetry has been described as a way to quote unquote make and unmake texts, in that it draws attention to the source material, but it also rejects the conclusions and even premises of it. When you made grasp and release, was it your main goal to like unmake the medical files, or are there more reasons for choosing this genre of poetry, like aesthetic reasons? Were you inspired by like other blackout poetry, works of blackout poetry, that kind of thing?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Great question and great definition of blackout poetry. Thank you for bringing that into today. I think a lot of things happen like by accident, you know, and so after I'd done the installation and performance, where I'd also recorded myself reading my medical file, I had another residency, and I was like, I can't listen to the medical file again. Like it was really cool to investigate it, but it's such a heavy text. And so then I was in the studio, and I was just trying lots of different things. And then I just picked up the paper and tried the blackout poetry. And so all the things that you're saying are definitely what was the outcome, you know, like looking back, I think there's something really beautiful about taking power back into the medical file and making poetry about it. And, you know, the way that they talk about your body is so, it can be so dark when you read it. And so all of those kind of intentionality behind blackout poetry definitely happened for me. And I think it's something, well, I was aware of blackout poetry, but I didn't know the history of it. And then I, you know, read about that person that did blackout poetry every day and did a book. He did it out of the New York Times, I think. And so I've done a couple of workshops where we've, you know, bought the New York Times, and people have done that because also I don't know if people should take their medical files into a workshop and do poetry. Like I think if you want to do that at home, that's fine. But I think you know, especially when you're working with like trauma or heavy histories, you've got to be careful about how you work with that. And so that's also just something I would say, like, if you feel ready to do a practice that kind of investigates those kinds of sites, you have to be careful around all of those things. But I would welcome other people to try, you know, their own investigation. But yeah, I just loved how it kind of created something so unexpected. And I also used the poems as a movement score to like create movement, and so that was really cool as well. So it was I would like to say that I'm not as like clever as you're giving like me credit for deciding to do blackout poetry. Like it was very like 5 minutes in the studio, and I was like, oh, let's just try this marking on the pen. And I was like, oh, this is really cool, so but as I've thought more about it, all the things you're saying is true. And then I guess the other thing is like when you're an artist, you like investigate something, but you don't necessarily know what that means until way later. Like you're just making, and then later you'll be like, oh, that makes sense in that way. And so I also think you're not completely sure what you're doing at the time or what it means as well. Yeah, but thank you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the second question is that so I know you've talked a lot about about how the concept of crypt time interacts with the concept of the va in your work. So like I'm not like what would you say are like some major differences? Like do you find it easier to convey information through one framework or another? Does it vary based on the audience that you have in mind for your work? That kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting question. I think I like try and find places where all of the frameworks can live together. I haven't normally found a place where one is more important than the other. And like say, crypt time can also be in the way that you facilitate something, like if I make a work, we start at 10 and we finish at 2. We're not working like 10 to 6 in the studio. So like crypt time can also be the frameworks don't have to be so heavy. They can also be the way that you hold space or you're with people. I guess that's why I said like the VAR is just inherent, like it's always happening. Even like before when I was talking and I was like on my run and I wasn't sharing the screen, and then no one was sure whether to like tell me or not because you don't want to be rude. And so there was like, but I was like, there's something weird with my screen, but I think it's fine. Like we're trying to negotiate relationships all the time, and like what are the protocols and what the online space is such a strange place as well. And so I think I like to find places where everybody or all the frameworks can live together. I don't really think about them as separate frameworks.
No, that makes sense. Like, sorry if that was like a bothersome question or something. And
it's interesting. Yeah.
And thank you again. I'm gonna turn it over to Avery now.
Hi, my name's Avery. I am oh wait, let me just spotlight myself. There we go. Thank you. I am a white college woman. I am wearing a red shirt and the background's a white wall. I just wanted to thank you again so much for meeting with us. It has been so insightful, like what you've been able to tell us. I've noticed a little bit about what you've been talking about, especially with your artwork, there's like fluidity to it, which I think is really interesting. And I noticed just from online sources that your dance is like very important to your life, and I was just wondering like how you incorporate it into your art, if you do it anyway.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, dance is really important. I mean, that's where I started my career. Like I was a founding member of the first kind of dance company that had disabled people in it in New Zealand, and I did that as a kid. And so I think that was really exciting. Again, when you grow up disabled, you often like grow up only with the people who have the same condition as you. And so I think the other cool thing about getting to be a dancer from a really young age, and I went on tour and was in this professional company, but I got to like work with disabled people of different who had different disabilities. And so that was really cool to kind of have that understanding of other people's needs from a young age. And I think also as a disabled person, like you're often people don't really like take notice of your body. Like they take notice of your body and like your body is different, but people are not thinking about your body as in my body is just, it has value as much as yours. As I'm thinking about the medical system, and I'd love it if doctors thought that my range of movement is just my range of movement, and how can we like, this feels like a rant against the medical system. What can I say that's helpful? I think really it's, if I didn't dance, then I wouldn't move my body as much. And so in a way, like dance for me is kind of self-care, because I'm, you know, yeah, no one else is going to help me look after my body. And so dance for me is a way to like look after my body. And I think as anybody does, we often say, you know, we take care of our friends and all these people that are important to us, but we don't always take care of ourselves. And so dance is really important for me because it's a way of looking after myself. I live next to a train station. I hope the train is not coming through. And so that's something that's really important. And then I think I'm also really interested in like pushing back as to what dance can even be, you know, like that's why I think like typing on your keyboard is a form of movement, or like that's why I think the keyboard works are important, because it's talking about movement as a way of, that's not a way that you think about movement. And so I think dance is a really elite art form where people think that you're meant to like jump and do splits and stuff, but like the smallest movement that you can make can also be really beautiful. And so I think I'm interested in like, I think Kayla Hamilton, another disabled dancer, I was reading her bio the other day and she said it, I don't know if she said post dance or something to the lines of like, we're interested in stuff that's not considered dance. And I would agree with her. It's like, I'm also interested in like everyday movement. So I think dance can be so many things, and I would love it if we thought about dance in these kind of expansive ways. Moving our bodies is really important. But yeah, and I think you know, is sitting a form of movement? I mean, it is. You're sitting, you're like doing a thing, but we don't think that's movement. So I think that's why I'm interested in dance, is like, I'm interested in all the things that no one thinks is dance. What is the smallest movement? And then also just like, it's a way of looking after my own body is a basic answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then just switching topics a little bit. So this is a question based on like your experience working with museums. So your work allows a collective conservation of the disabled community's lived experience. And then coincidentally, your works have participated in decolonizing museum spaces by placing an inclusive environment inside an area that traditionally excludes minority and CRIP artists. So I just wanted to know kind of what was your experience like working in the museum environment that's changing, yet at the same time is still opposed to implementing changes. So that was kind of a lot of questions within one, but like if you could just give your experience working with museums, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, I think the museum is a really fascinating site. And I think the person that's kind of informed that is an artist called Rosanna Raymond. She's based in Auckland, but she was based in London for like 20 years. And so she is Sāmoan, Tahitian, Pakehā, and she went to London and she couldn't get a job there because her visa didn't allow it. And she ended up at the British Museum, and for her, being so far away from home, like seeing these artifacts from where she was from made her feel like she was seen. And then someone asked her to work on a project with her. And so ever since then, she has this deep museum practice where she says that it's kind of our places to go into these museums. And so through her, I've got to go into the stores of the Met and the stores of the Brooklyn Museum, and she has this practice of kind of, we also went to the Museum of Natural History and did an activation there, and we kind of opened the space and closed the space, and she kind of is the person that taught me that museums are really important for people to be in, but I guess more as an Indigenous person thinking about kind of that connection. again, like thinking about relationships, that these people are like our ancestors, and we need to go and visit them and like talk to them. So she's kind of who's taught me how to be in museums, I guess, and how to have that kind of activation process. And then I think another person that's kind of informed it is Finnegan Shannon. They have these benches that say things like it was hard to get here, rest if you agree. And so I think it's so simple to have a bench and have this message, you know, that's kind of critiquing the museum for not having enough seats, for saying, you know, it's hard enough to get here, you know, in a place to rest. And so I think both of them are thinking about museums and public spaces and their relationships in a really interesting way. And so I think they've kind of informed how I think about the museum, because I don't think I would have been someone who was like, I'm going to work in the museum. But I did do a workshop at the Met in the Oceanic Gallery, and it was really cool because it was a day that was raining, and so it was like super busy because everyone was like, it's raining, we have to go to a museum. And we did a workshop around kind of the keyboard marks, but also to kind of introduce people to like, why do these taonga, so Taonga, which means treasure in Māori, why do these taonga in these museums have these marks? You know, a lot of people I would find are quite ignorant of why these artifacts have these markings. And so that was kind of cool to like invite people that these marks have meaning, and to kind of just help them look at the taonga in a special way. Yeah, I'm not sure if I've answered all the questions, but trying to cover some bases there.
That was perfect. Thank you.
And sorry, coming back to me, I have a question from like the whole group, basically. It's kind of a barrage. What is your favorite exhibition that you have taken part in your career? Can you share anything related to any upcoming exhibits you might have or work you might have? And like, does it relate to your previous work? And lastly, are there any artists you haven't mentioned yet who have influenced the way you create art?
Yeah, great questions. Thank you. Well, obviously my favorite exhibition was the one that Kenny curated at the Shaw's Museum. That was really cool, about just the sheer number of disabled artists that were there. And then I guess my other one that I really love is on now at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver, and that was something that Finnegan curated. And so the show is called Don't Mind If I Do, and Finnegan and some technicians have kind of fabricated a sushi train where all the like works are on the train. And so it's kind of don't mind if I do as like an invitation to be like, oh, don't mind if I do, let me sit down, play with these works, and have a relationship with them. And then there's really comfy seating, and so again it's like there's only some poetry on the walls that Finn and Lou Kaiser, another artist, created. So, you know, everyone comes in, you go and you look at the white walls, and there's nothing to look at really other than this kind of invitation, you know, and then everyone doesn't know what to do. They look at the couches and they're like, is that the installation? They look at like the air purifier and they're like, is that the installation? And like no one will touch the pieces of art that are on the sushi train because they're so conditioned not to touch. So then they always have a visitor person who like invites people, and there's something so playful about watching people sit down and like play and touch with works. And so for those I made some puzzles, because I really loved puzzles as a kid, and they're kind of based on those geometric wooden puzzles that you had, but using kind of those like the diamond and some other shapes, and then using the marks of the malu, and you can kind of create your own like pattern. So I really love that, and that's on until the January 7th, 2024. But I just love like how Finn just invited artists who had informed their practice. You know, the exhibition is a mask only space. You know, they have masks at the door, and it's just it's, you know, trying to kind of prioritize a sitting experience and a like tactile experience, which I guess if you're thinking about decolonial ways of thinking about the museum, like that space definitely does. You know, everyone wants to look at everything but the like playful sushi train. I think also like museums are meant to be serious, work is meant to be serious, it's meant to be really theoretical, or the work is really theoretical, but you can like touch it and play with it, which I think is great. Yeah, I think that's the most upcoming that I can think of. And then yeah, I think while I lived in New York, I was really lucky to be part of this kind of disability community, and worked with Yo-Yo Lin. We still work together. We have a project called Rotations, and so that project, again, teaching is a very kind of who gets to be a teacher. Not a lot of disabled people are teachers, or we're not asked to teach. And so, or when you are a disabled artist, you often learn from a non-disabled artist. So Rotations asks different disabled artists to share their practice with only a disabled audience. We don't check if you're disabled at the door, but it is for disabled chronically ill people to come. And so it's a place for us, by us, and a space for you if you're an artist to kind of figure something out. Like maybe you want to try a methodology, or you want to try a score or see if it works. It's also like once you do your first workshop, often people will like ask you to do your second one. It's just getting that first one down. So and Rotations thinks about the moon and how in different phases it's just as powerful, and so it has 8 to 9 people in every rotation. So we're doing another season of that. Yeah, so Finnegan has really impacted my work, and all the artists in that exhibition. Yo-Yo, Kayla Hamilton, someone I mentioned before, they're a Black disabled artist, and she is a dancer. She works with audio description a lot. Carolyn Lazard, I met Carolyn at like the New Museum. They were really just great. I think what's really exciting is that there's so many that it's like hard for me to like remember everyone, which I think is really cool. And then they had that festival called I Want to Be With You Everywhere, and they had it in 2019 at Performance Space, and then they had it again this year at Performance Space, and that was really impactful because it brought artists from across the US. So they had artists from the West Coast like Neve and some other artists from the West Coast, and also other artists from the East Coast, and it was cross disability, and they had a bit of a nightlife and all those things. And so for me, I Want to Be With You Everywhere was like really impactful. It was like so cool. Everything started late, so I arrived half an hour late, and that was like basically on time. So I loved, like, for me that was all the artists involved in that is like I would say has been really impactful for me in thinking about how to create disability spaces. I think those are all the questions, Leah.
Yeah, that was really insightful. Thank you.
Okay. Wow. So much fantastic work and fantastic questions. I think that we have just a couple of minutes, so I do just want to see whether perhaps anyone else in the Zoom room would like to pose something to Pelenakeke Brown. That could be in the chat, or perhaps one of my students has something else that they would like to pose as a question. And Kenny, I don't know if perhaps you might even want to say a word about Queering the Crypt, but just a few thoughts to open things further. And I'll just wait a moment, and then if we're done, we're done.
Well, I could just add that I mean, KK was quite multidisciplinary, because not only did we show a grasp and release in the exhibit, but they were also part of the performance festival that was associated with the exhibit. Did a beautiful, beautiful performance, which I wish had been recorded, and brought her sister with her from New Zealand. So yeah, so it was, it was great, and I had worked with KK. I put it in the chat. KK has written about rotations for a project that I did that's been published on Word Gathering. So I've worked with KK in a bunch of different ways, and it's just always great to see and hear and learn from KK.
Likewise, Kenny. Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you, Elizabeth and Kenny, and thank you everyone for your really great questions. It's so great to have realized how much thought you've put into it. And there's another question that's come in. How have you noticed the shift culturally from pandemic in terms of people's willingness for remote aspects of work to return to normal, where the need is the something, but interest at large might be less? Thank you. So people's willingness for remote aspects of work to return to normal where the need is there, but interest at large may be less. Yeah, I don't know what it's like in the US, but in New Zealand, I'm a contractor, so I feel quite lucky that I get to choose, the kind of working arrangements. But my uncle owns a business and he really wants everyone at the office. And so I feel like that's a shift that people want. And so I agree with you that there's this willingness there. But it's difficult and frustrating, right? If you know that something works. And I think we all felt that, especially disabled people in the pandemic, remote accommodations occurred, going to university, they had online learning, all these things, and slowly we're kind of doing the return to normal. So I feel like I can't speak to the US or really to a normal working environment as a contractor, but or a freelancer, but I acknowledge that there's that pain there, and it's really hard to have those conversations with people. And I've even had them too, people just really like bums on seats, and it's like, we don't have to do that. And so, yeah, I feel for people who are having those conversations right now.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. And thank you for your answer. It's a really tough time right now in terms of negotiating these issues and the sort of willful forgetting that health and lives and risks are real. So thank you for that. And I think that's a powerful way for us to close, and for me and my students to give you massive, massive virtual thanks for being here with us today, and for sharing your work. It's a great gift. And with that, I will say goodbye to all of us in the room and the meeting. Thank you so much.